It's called me. I aim to kill like Kid Cherokee. New Kid.
You may not like the news, but you have to admire the person who delivers it. Paperboy.
Paperboy is quite possibly one of Atari's most iconic games. Released for the arcades in 1985, originally developed in 1984, you take control of a paperboy on a bicycle delivering newspapers along a suburban street. The goal is to deliver a week's worth of daily newspapers to subscribing companies by throwing them into the mailboxes or onto the doormats of subscribers. It's not that easy though, as you'll find yourself quite often vandalizing non-subscribers' homes as you throw newspapers through the windows. This must be avoided, as are the crazy inhabitants of this suburban road. With the arcade game being fairly doable on the PC, you'd expect the IBM PC owners to have a good port, but sadly not. For a start, you can't even see half the playing area. The camera is zoomed in so far that you can just about scrape by any roadside objects. And that's if you're lucky, because the collision detection is unbelievably bad in some areas of this game. After playing so many awful Amiga arcade ports, it's nice to play one that's actually really good. The way this port sounds and looks is excellent, especially for its time. It even plays really well, although I would say it seems a lot harder than the arcade original. For the system, this port of Paperboy is rather impressive. If I'm to be honest, I was expecting much worse. The controls are responsive enough, even though it's keyboard only, and the collision detection seems fair. All round a pretty good attempt at bringing the arcade game to the BBC Micro. Oh, and by the way, the Acorn Electron version is exactly the same as this. We've been fairly lucky with Apple II games on Battle of the Ports recently, but that luck had to end, and it sure did in spectacular fashion. When I say this is almost unplayable, I actually mean that. The controls are so delayed that you have to be constantly thinking 2 screens ahead. Ah, the good old Commodore Plus 4, the first computer I ever owned back in the mid-80s. I was actually surprised to know Paperboy was released on this system. It's also graphically competent, with smooth enough scrolling, although the gameplay could be better. For a start, there doesn't seem to be any way to speed up or slow down. Then there's the dog, which seems impossible to avoid at times. Still, it's a pretty good effort for the Plus 4. Smooth enough scrolling, responsive controls, but graphics that look like they just dribbled out of a dog's bum. Now you may think I'm being harsh, but just wait till you see what an Amstrad CPC can really do. This Spanish-made CPC version is nothing compared to what you're about to see. Now this is what an Amstrad CPC is capable of producing. This 1987 UK release really does show the power of the Amstrad. It's a much more capable system than many give it credit for. Just a shame this version has no audio at all. After the colourful Amstrad port with arcade-like graphics, it really does make you grateful that the system didn't receive just another ZX Spectrum port. While this version of Paperboy plays alright, it's not really a looker. Surprisingly, the Commodore 64 port is possibly the worst of the top 3 8-bit systems. The controls just feel unresponsive, plus there's a lot of unfair enemy placements, making the game more frustrating than fun. This ST port, as you can see, looks pretty good, but what on earth did they do to the play mechanics? The bike controls are awfully twitchy, making it really tough to navigate the play area. It's also tricky to control the speed at which you travel. This is one arcade port where the Amiga actually wins over the ST with ease. Believe that Teartex were behind this port? No? Neither can I. They've actually produced something competent. No, even more than competent. This port of Paperboy looks good and sure puts every other 8-bit version to shame, including the so-called almighty NES version, which is coming up next. Yes, this Famicom NES version does look rather simple compared to the Master System. However, kudos to the sampled sound effects. They do add a little bit of the arcade feeling to the game. It also plays fairly well too. It's just a shame it doesn't have the looks to match the gameplay. Could this possibly be the ultimate home port of Paperboy? Well, it sure looks pretty, has the sampled speech from the arcade game, something no other version has, plus it even controls well. Actually, it controls a little too well. More of the time, the developers of this port have added a little more movement to Paperboy's bike, slightly changing how the game plays. To some, this may be a plus, while to others, it's a negative.
That's kind of big, isn't it? I need glasses. Boy, what a headache. Don't tell my boss. I live a life of danger.
Finally, onto the handheld ports. First up, we have the Game Gear version, which is pretty much identical to the Master System version. Isn't it funny how the Game Gear version of Paperboy is basically the Master System version, while this Game Boy version is just the NES version, but in black and white. The Gameboy Colour is home to a much more nicer version of Paperboy than the regular Game Boy, but it's not without its faults. The handling feels a little twitchy at times, and things such as the game freezing before the stunt course, which has crazy jump physics, are kind of annoying, and it breaks up the momentum of the game. And finally we finish with the good old Atari Lynx port from Atari themselves. I really do like the way this port is jam-packed full of sound effects. It makes many of the other ports seem silent. Actually, some of them were silent. And let's take a look at all those versions of Paperboy running side by side. There are so many to choose from, but which one do you think is the best?